Yes. So, good morning, everyone. Good morning. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to today's forum on cybersecurity risks and trends. We're very glad that you could join us. We're happy to see all of you joining the call. My name is Rhoda Mwangi. I'm the communications lead here at AmCham, and I will be the moderator for today's session. I want to start by thanking and recognizing our partners for this forum, Gras Savoye, Willis, Watson, and Oracle, who will be graciously sharing their insights today on how organizations can adequately prepare to respond to cyber risks and data breach incidents. This is a timely topic, given the ever-growing threats to digital threats, and may exacerbated, of course, by our current need to work remotely and to also to share data and services across various digital platforms. So it is our hope that this session will provide useful insights and to all of you and help you to plan and to prepare your organizations to adequately respond to these threats. So our program today is divided into two sections. We will first hear presentations from our speakers, and then we will go into an open Q&A session, and we welcome you to share your questions, thoughts, and comments during this time, and we'll do the best that we can to address your questions in the course of this forum. And feel free to submit those questions through the Q&A, through the chat box at the bottom of your screen, even as the session progresses. We kindly request that you keep your audio and your video muted so that we can be able to give our speakers the attention that they need. So therefore, just to kick us off, I will introduce our first speaker, Dr. Avinash Ramtohul, the Consulting Director for Africa and Country Leader for Mauritius at Oracle. Thank you, and the screen is yours, Dr. Avinash.
Good morning, Rhoda. Good morning to everybody, and good morning as well to my colleagues on this call. I think we are today at a very interesting point in time where we have lived and we are still living the explosion of data. Some people call it the new oil. Others term it the new soil, which means that there is a lot of value associated with data. Data has been increasing exponentially, so much so that it is now becoming the land for companies to mine, to churn, and to extract not just intelligence, but business value, and also derive new revenue streams. While deriving new revenue streams, the traditional revenue streams remain for quite a while, and it becomes very important then to protect those revenue streams and also to protect the new revenue streams that are generating. Coupled with the business imperatives of protecting these streams, there also is the need for organizations to comply to local legislations and also to comply to industry regulations, as well as international standards that have emerged as part of the overall development process, which companies, economies are going through. So, ladies and gentlemen, cybersecurity is high on the agenda of companies today. There is not a single company that does not have an IT project today, if you look around. And there is no IT project that does not have a security part to it. And I think it is important for us all to relook at a little bit of the basics here. And I thought I'd start with that this morning. So while trying to establish a system that will help us manage security, there are 4 key elements that we want to address here. First, it is the confidentiality. That is, when we mean someone to have access to an information, it should be only and only that person who has that access. Integrity would actually mean that information which is to be accessed is in the proper form. It has not changed, it has not been contaminated or infected as the authentic user is accessing it. And availability would be where, if I want to have access to information now, I should have access to it. And non-repudiation would be, I cannot come in and repudiate a transaction that I have committed or conducted, whether it is an access to data, it is a modification that I've made to a data, or it is a delete process that I executed. So non-repudiation. Therefore, confidentiality, integrity, availability, and non-repudiation are all part of what we want to establish. And clubbed with that, we have business continuity planning, which means that everything really is about information assurance. And there are 4 key players there, if you want. There are the people, there is the policy, there is the process, and there is the technology. So these 4 pillars would work together to deliver the confidentiality, integrity, availability, and non-repudiation. And they all form part of an integrated system or strategy which has to be established in order to give assurance not just to our customer community, but also to our partner community, to our internal communities, and also to the authorities. And these would actually bring the required attraction for customers to work with us, for business partners to be interested with us, and for the government to establish and associate enough credibility with our organization. Now, information security is not just a technology issue. Information security rather is more of a business issue, and it has now turned out to be a strategic tool for us to stay ahead of competition and to also demonstrate to our stakeholders that this company, this organization has the right processes in place to ensure that people's data are secure. And today people are very sensitive about their data. We all know what happens with the type of, the trackers that we see on the internet that are actually trying to follow our behavior. And based on that behavior, they would apply some type of behavioral science like the psychometric test in order to understand what is it that this person wants in terms of products, for example. That could be one specific outcome of that kind of tracker. But all in all, there is a lot of tracking that is taking place today on the internet. And not everybody is comfortable with that. Not everybody wants to be tracked. In fact, when people are being tracked, there are new services and products that come out of those. There is an ethical side to it. There is a legal side to it. There also is a business side to it. But I think we will make abstraction of those and stick to the point that not everybody is comfortable with his information being available in a certain set of quarters. However, and to react to that, there have been industry standards and government regulations, data protection and privacy rules that have emerged in different sections of the world. And many of them are actually applicable to our region also. If we look at, for example, the GDPR, the GDPR is applicable to residents of the European Union, the 27 members. However, it also has an extraterritorial effect where I am based out of Kenya and I'm managing information pertaining to residents of the European Union, then I am bound to respect the provisions of GDPR. And interestingly, the data protection laws that have been enacted in Kenya have very much followed the provisions of GDPR to a very large extent. And we've seen South Africa, for example, there is the Protection of People Information Act, we call that the POPI Act, where one of the sections has just been enacted around the need to keep information confidential with a set of prescribed measures. Therefore, there are actually a lot of regulations that are being enacted. Now, all these within the world that we qualify as VUCA, the volatility, the uncertainty, the change, and the ambiguity that we used to live in have just been accentuated by the advent of COVID-19. And with that, there have been a set of technology trends which are very interesting to observe. The World Economic Forum has actually observed that there has been a very serious uptake of online shopping and robot deliveries. In order to avoid use of notes, of physical notes, because it has been actually, with empirical evidence, it has been established that the notes can carry the virus. Therefore, digital and contactless payments have also gone up. Now, obviously, with online shopping, digital payment would actually increase, but contactless payments have obviously have also seen an increase. Remote work has been now next to the norm, and Industry 4.0 has also been more and more adopted by organizations feeling the pressure of delivering to customers all the transactions that are coming out of the online shopping. And this has really increased drastically. For students, they have been exposed more to distance learning. Companies actually that never thought they would be using cloud, they've seen themselves starting to use cloud to a very large extent. And there have been a lot of deliveries with drones as well. So these are some trends that we have seen. With people working from home, with people being constrained and confined to four walls, there had to be other ways of entertainment, and online entertainment seemed to be the default one. So that has seen an uptake also. A key question to ask here is whether these changes are reversible. Actually, it's very, very difficult to reverse these changes because people have already got into a certain trend of life that is working out for them. And the priority of people is to protect their health and to protect the health of their loved ones. Therefore, when we look at the trends that have been established, it doesn't seem to be reversible. But at the same time, there have also been changes in the business model. Businesses have been called upon to enhance the agility with which they operate. Therefore, automation has also come up to a very, very large extent. Now, all these have applied more pressure on internet networks. Why? Because many more transactions have actually been conducted online. And this also states that there is now more risks because information is actually transiting everywhere. And therefore, did cybersecurity just get more strategic for success? A survey conducted, now we've got the source here, that was PwC, that was conducted with 1638 technology and security executives globally. So the impact on budget for the year 2022 that we can see actually states that 12% of the respondents have seen that there would be an increase by 50% or more in their budget. Between 11 and 14% increase, that is 14% of the respondents have seen that, 25% have seen that it'll increase between 6 to 10%, and 18% have seen that it'll increase by around 5%. Actually, what this states is that companies are investing more in cybersecurity because they've seen what trends are. They've seen that there are more risks. They've seen that there is more dependency of their business on digital technologies. However, having said that, there are a lot of risks that still face organizations. And we also know that a lot of these risks emanate from internal sources. So some people can be dysfunctional, and therefore in these four key pillars that I mentioned, people, policy, process, and technology, people can appear to be the weakest link in that, because if 2-3 people who are privileged on the system decide to dysfunction, decide to collude, this can actually bring a lot of risks, and those risks can be materialized into cybersecurity events, breaches. Now, those would be some default actions that people could take. However, there are in some situations a lack of proper administration of systems with, maybe not a timely patching. And there have been a lot of cybersecurity breaches that occurred because the latest patch was not applied. There could also be outdated hardware, which could give rise to cybersecurity events, because forget not that a hard disk failing could actually bring disruption of service, could bring denial of service, and that would reduce availability of systems. And this American saying or statement of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, I think that statement is totally unapplicable to our environment here. If we have a system that is working, we say this system is working, so it doesn't need to be fixed. But we should also be conscious of the fact that the whole environment around the system is evolving. The stakeholders' systems are evolving. And if we do not innovate on existing systems, we are, to a very, very large extent, leaving open loopholes for people with wrong intentions to come in and exploit those. Now, coming back to COVID, again, there have been, and we've noticed that more solicitation for companies to establish maximum availability architecture. So data masking, for example, data masking is one of the requirements that we've seen being increased, right? Why? Because companies want to review, retest, upgrade, and update their systems. And external companies that are coming in to deploy those services, they have to make sure that they do not access real data, but data that is masked. Segregation of duties is also a very important element here. And we should know that, and those of you who probably have operated as a database administrator at some point in time would know that you are maybe the most powerful person in the organization, because you can have access to the latest financial report even before the board or the CEO sees it. And database administrators, unfortunately, in many cases, could also have backdoor access to data, which actually allows them to go in and change business data. So segregation of duties actually creates a sharp line of demarcation between what the DBA can do and what he cannot. So he could access maybe the systems data and not the business data. Companies have also started looking more into setting up DR services so that there is more availability of services and of data. So we can look at it in two layers. For example, when you're looking at a system, the database security and the application layer security. For the database security, it is critical that we protect audit information. This way, we will know who did what on which data object, so that we have traceability of transactions. Hence, people cannot come in and repudiate having conducted a transaction or not having conducted a transaction. In order to ease the lives of users, single sign-on helps organizations help their users better manage their set of user IDs and passwords. In some cases, people could be having 10, 15 user IDs and passwords. So single sign-on makes it easy. And we've seen an adoption of single sign-on across different industries. And extracting intelligence and patterns from identity usage. For example, if someone always logs in to his system from a specific set of IP addresses with a specific operating system, and also within a specific set of time or time fork. And suddenly there is a change in that. So identity analytics would pick that as an event that doesn't look normal and would probably carry out a set of tests with the user before authenticating that user. And that is one part of what identity analytics could do. But on the other, it also provides a lot of intelligence around the way identities are being used in system. And that calls for a whole process of governing identities for users. And I think today, I thought I'd just bring in these elements to put forward the idea that, yes, there is so much more information available out there on the internet that is transiting on the internet. And that data is extremely important for organizations. It is actually very strategic for our organization. A cybersecurity approach is critical for organizations to survive and thrive in today's time. And it is critical for us all to be, as we are the weakest link, that is the people link out of these 4 key pillars, we need to really be sensitized around the need to operate within the framework of the data protection regulations, and as an organization to be compliant to that. Rhoda, and dear all, this was the gist of my message today. I would like to thank you for your attention. We have Philip, who will be supporting us during the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Avinash, for such an enlightening presentation. I think, and also just the practical steps that organizations can take: segregation of duties, traceability of transactions, extracting patterns, single sign-ons. I think that was very, very useful information. And thank you very much for making the time to join us today. And I know you have to drop off, so we'll connect with Philip in the Q&A. So thank you. We'll move on to our next presentations, which will be done by Gras Savoye, Willis Watson, and we have 2 speakers. One is Dennis Odongo, is the head of corporate risks and broking. And we'll also have later on Paolo Ferrarese, who's the global Finex practice for Central Eastern Europe, Middle East, and Africa. So I'd like to welcome Dennis to kick off their presentation. Over to you.
Thanks, Rhoda. We have a few slides to share with you, ladies and gentlemen, and to start off, I'll introduce our company. We are Gras Savoye in Kenya, but operating under the global umbrella of Willis Towers Watson. Willis Towers Watson is present in over 140 countries globally and 39 offices in Africa, employing over 40,000 employees across the world. And what I'm going to do this morning is to bring the cyber risk discussion into the Kenyan context, and just to highlight some of the things we are seeing locally. And then my colleague Paolo will come in with us insurance solutions to address cyber issues, cyber risks. Dr. Avinash has talked largely about the risk management element of it. So what Paolo will be talking about is, should there be breaches, then how can insurance be used to mitigate losses and also compensate for any losses that may have been suffered. So in Kenya, you may all be aware that we have now established, or we have now put in place the Data Protections Act, cited as the Data Protection Act 2019, which largely aims at promoting guidance and best practices for organizations in terms of handling and processing of data, and also establishing structures and to support the proper implementation and governance within organizations and at government level. Some of the things that the Act establishes are the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner, and also the registration of controllers and their duties, the data controllers and their duties. It also highlights a lot about the rights of data subjects. And this is now where the issues start coming in, because there can be a lot of suits and issues coming from how the data is handled and the recourse as to how, what the data subjects could do if they have any issues with how the data has been handled. So it addresses the issues right from collection of the data all the way to usage and retention. And then we have an upsurge in internet subscriptions, and this also is reflected in the level of security threats, the cyber threats that we've had in the country over the past years. In the next graphs, you'll see how these have evolved. Lily, next. So we have been seeing an upsurge in the number of cyber threats, especially over the past 6-7 years. But again, going by the recent reports we've been seeing around the quarterly reports given by CMgr and the media, then we could be talking of hundreds of threats targeting individuals, hundreds of thousands of threats targeting individuals, corporates, and government systems in the recent past. For example, Q4 of 2019, it was reported that we had about 56 million attacks. And comparing that Q4 of 2020 to Q4 of 2019, where we had 37 million. So we're already seeing that quarter alone, the number was almost doubling. We're seeing a lot more of malware attacks. These are malicious software attacks. And this is really where there are big threats in the current situation we are in with the COVID-19. Next slide. And then these are some of the things we've been seeing in our headlines in response to the attacks and also actual issues that have come out, banks being hacked and also people getting prepared, companies getting prepared to address issues arising from cyber attacks. One of the things we've seen, especially with our SMEs, is the notion locally that probably this is not an issue for us in Kenya, it's not an issue for us in Africa. Probably they think we think it's a foreign issue. We think we are too small to be attacked. We think we hold too little data to be exposed. But I think going by what we've seen happening recently with SMEs, they're the softest targets for cyber criminals. So that then begs the question, if these things, the threats were to be affected, then what will it be? How can these organizations respond and be protected? And that's when we come in with the solution with my colleague, Paolo is going to take us through. So at this point, I will want to hand over to Paolo.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Dennis. Thank you, Dr. Avinash. And myself and James Johnston will carry on for a few minutes. We're based in Dubai, and like Dennis said, we covered the Central Eastern Europe and Middle East and Africa for financial lines. One of them is cyber, and I think there's no need to further stress the importance of the moment in history with regard to cyber. Is already being raised by the previous speakers. What I would like to do is spend a few minutes on the cyber insurance, which has grown very dynamically over the last probably decade to try and intercept the needs and requirements of organizations and governments across the globe in a very evolving way in order to be able to respond to regulators' input and external actors' input. So what you see here is basically the factors that have been driving the need for cyber insurance. A lot of focus has been put on data by the previous speakers. I would like to highlight the fact that threats are not just threat and outputs and consequences are not just limited to data. The three big families of potential threats that we have for organizations across industries are malicious attacks are more internal issues, non-malicious usually, which are very often related to human errors. And then we have the more technical aspect of system failures. Each of these three triggers and three threats can have different impacts and different consequences on organizations. One of them, which we touched upon, could be the breach in the disclosure of confidential information. But then there are also first party, what we call in insurance, impact and consequences, which can be the interruption and disruption of the computer system. It can be financial harm to the companies. It can be a more intangible reputational harm to organizations. And we'll probably spend a little bit more time later on theft of funds, okay? And the potential outcomes of all these different scenarios can be legal proceedings and regulatory investigations. This is usually mainly related to data. It can be crisis management and incident response costs. It can be in business interruption. So very bluntly, a loss of profit due to inability to perform one company's activity. Increased cost of working because all these events will inevitably trigger the need for restore some of and probably improve some of the previous IT capabilities. And then bottom from last is ransom payments, which again will probably attract a separate couple of minutes. So if Lily can go to the next slide, please. This is a timeline of the most recognizable events affecting the cyber market. This is from 2015, but I would say probably in the last decade. Okay, there's been a number of insurers starting to competitively underwrite cyber insurance. There has been a historical deterioration of rates, and then there has been a double impact from regulatory input in terms of rollout of GDPR and rollout of data regulation across the globe. Every country name it in a different way, but by and large, the content is the same. And then a lot of specific and quite recognizable, I'm sure you will see the NotPetya, the SolarWinds, and so on. A lot of attacks and a lot of losses that has generated a number of significant loss claims in the cyber market. From 2020 onwards, we tend to say that we are in the ransomware crisis, in the sense that the highest number of events that we've seen and having repercussions in the cyber market from a claims perspective has been triggered by ransomware events. Over to the next slide, we have a quite visual representation of how insurance policies have tried to cope with the emergence of cyber threats. Okay, and this is we try to wrap up the entire event of global industries. So we're talking here cross industries policies, from property to general liability to other pure financial and professional lines insurance. So you will see that historically, property liability had never had any sort of cyber protection, and crime, directors and officers, and professional liability have had and still have some mild form of protection against the cyber-related event. while you will see that obviously all these threats and all this exposure is specifically addressed by traditional cyber policies. I would like to highlight especially property as one of the coverages, the traditional coverages that has come under scrutiny in terms of cyber exposure. There have been for decades, and over the last few years, this has been phased out, some degree of coverage for cyber-related events. But then Lloyd's in London and the mainstream insurance companies have addressed what they call the silent cyber, and they have made specific provision that cyber coverage cannot be silent, that it needs to be addressed affirmatively, or it has to be excluded from property coverages. And that's why this has triggered, and we will see, in the next slide, a response also from property reinsurers. So these are the insurance market responses to the evolving needs and requirements of companies and organizations. As we were saying before, physical damage as a result of a cyber event for a number of years has been partly or silently included under property policies. This is no longer the case. There is a specific response which has been provided by cyber insurers and reinsurers related to certain elements of physical damage related to cyber. So you will see that some of the property damage, the debris removal, the bodily injury, the environmental damage, and the business interruption can be provided to organizations that need, property damage, property coverages. There are enhanced business interruption coverage as a result of cyber event, which cover a number of scenarios. Then we go to specific cyber crime coverage. Cyber crime has been a very hot topic, and it's a topic that has created some possible confusion and misunderstanding. The cyber market has somehow performed a U-turn in the sense that there has been a time when cyber crime, so what we're specifically defining as theft and as loss of assets following cybercrime, has been covered by cyber insurance and cyber insurers. But because this has grown over the years and has become unsustainable, the cyber markets have now started to diminish and to reduce the level of coverage provided under these cyber policies. We would probably like to say at this point that the best way to address cyber crime and computer crime fraud would be specific crime policies. The cyber insurances probably are no longer the right fit for these kind of coverage. And then there's legal liability coverage examples in terms of failure to supply and everything that has got to do with professions. So going over to the next slide, I will leave these to James. This is just a very visual representation of how we got into the ransomware crisis. So I hand over to James.
Thank you, Paolo. Good morning, everybody. Pleasure to be here with you. As Paolo had said, the ransomware crisis has really become the key focus of the cyber risk in the recent years. I think that when large data protection legislation came in, such as the GDPR in Europe, and other parts around the world. And my colleague Dennis had mentioned, legislation in Kenya, that the cyber insurance market thought that data privacy issues would be the key exposures. And actually what we've seen in the last 2 years is that actually ransomware attacks have significantly overtaken data privacy and subsequent regulatory fines and investigations as the main exposure. And I think the reason because of that is the relative ease that ransomware attacks can be distributed, and the quite severe consequences that can be the outcomes of a successful ransomware attack. And so we won't dwell too long on each individual bullet point, and in the slide deck, which I think will get shared with everyone at the end of the session, has a lot of examples and scenarios of ransomware attacks. But I mean, as you can see here, the numbers are quite staggering. And this can be really as simple as companies coming into work one day and they're not able to access their computer systems or send any emails because there's been a virus that has successfully infiltrated their systems, or there's been data that's kind of stolen or threatened to be deleted. And until a ransom is paid by the target company, the criminals will either delete data or they will threaten to not release accessibility to the IT systems. And so it can become quite a critical matter. And so as you can see here, some companies have actually paid significant ransom payments, and CNA is an insurance company, and it paid a ransom payment because I think it felt that the consequences of not being able to trade was just too much not to pay the ransom. And the significant increase in the exposure to ransomware, as you can see from the numbers, has gone up dramatically in the last 5 or 6 years. And so really it's now the number one concern of insurers are these ransom attacks. And as Paolo had mentioned before, there were some quite well-known ones, and NotPetya and the SolarWinds attacks are becoming kind of mainstream news around the world. Can we go on to the next slide, please? So these two pie charts basically give an overview of the type of claims that we are seeing with our clients who buy cyber insurance. And as you can see, even in the space of a year, there was a huge increase of ransomware claims from just 4%, all the way up to the highest number, 23%. Of notifications that have come in the past year, and that's I think that's probably due to a number of reasons. That could be because of the remote working environment and the pandemic, and because companies seem to be more vulnerable. I think it's because criminals have become more sophisticated and aggressive, and they understand that the success rate of ransomware attacks can be quite high. And also sometimes it's state sponsored as well. And that's a real significant concern. It's a systemic exposure to companies and ultimately to the insurance market. And just one thing that Dr. Avinash had mentioned in his previous presentation was that the 4 key pillars, the human element is the one that usually falls down. It's the weakest element. And I think you can see here from the claims examples, in 2019, the highest claim was accidental disclosure of data. So that's human error. And that can be something as simple as sending a wrong attachment on an email to the wrong recipient. And if that data is deemed to be very sensitive or confidential, in some jurisdictions, that can be deemed to be a significant incident that has to be disclosed to regulators for an investigation. So, the human element is really important, and that's why companies are now being asked to look at internal training and cyber awareness, so that employees have an understanding of the cyber risks, and what to do and what not to do if they think they get suspicious emails, for example, and phishing attacks. If we can go on to the next slide, please. So the next 3 slides go quite a lot in detail on how the insurance policy is structured. As my colleague Paolo had mentioned before, there are 2 sides to a cyber insurance policy. We call the first party side, which covers the policyholder's own expenses arising from a cyber incident. So that could be incident response to deal with a data breach. And I'll go on later just to talk about how the policy would trigger in the event of a claim. And also the third party side, which is more of a legal liability cover. And so that comes into force if there's been a data breach and a third party or a regulator seeks to bring some sort of legal action because there's been a privacy breach. And again, a few years ago, that was probably the most significant exposure and danger that cyber experts and the insurance market were predicting, but now it's been overtaken by the ransomware attacks. So Lily, if we could just skip through this slide and the next 2. I won't go through all of the different clauses, and then we'll just focus on this. So the cyber insurance policy is a little bit different to a traditional insurance policy in that it kind of acts in real time once there's been a loss. So as soon as an incident is discovered, and because we are so dependent on IT and computer systems these days, you can't wait 3-4 weeks or months for incidents and issues to be resolved. They have to be resolved immediately in order to return to normal business operations. So what the cyber insurance policy will have is a 24-hour, 7 days a week hotline that can be called. It's usually operated by a law firm or a loss adjuster firm, and that will basically put the policyholder in touch with specialists who can respond depending on what the cyber incident or the loss has been. So that could be sending in IT forensic experts to find out what has actually happened and how to fix it. It could be legal advice if there's a regulatory investigation. It could be PR advice if there's a big data breach and it gets into the media, and how to deal with the media and shareholders and stakeholders of the business. And so it provides a real-time response, which I think is very helpful, and a lot of clients who've had cyber incidents have found it to be very valuable. And if there is a ransomware attack, it can in some cases, in some cases also indemnify the policyholder if they've paid a ransom, if they've decided that the best thing for their company is actually to pay the ransom. Because sometimes companies have refused to pay ransoms and they've suffered significant losses because they've not been able to access their computer systems because they didn't pay the ransom. So it's quite a serious concern, but one that the insurance market can provide assistance with. And I think with that, we are done. We have some appendices in the slide deck which provide some more detail on cyber incidents that have been seen around the world and losses, to give some more context to what we've been discussing, and also a slide on what cyber underwriters look for in policyholders when doing their due diligence on a risk. But for now, I think we are done, and I'll hand it back over to the question and answer session.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, James, Dennis, and Paolo for that really insightful presentation as well. Really key to understand how organizations can use insurance to support them in this matter, and as well how to craft a whole organization response in case of data breach. So just before we go into the Q&A session, we have a poll that would like to put up now. My colleague Massive will put up. It's just one question, and we want to understand from our audience if the frequency and intensity of cyber attacks has been has been a concern in your organizations in the recent years. We'll just take a minute for you to fill out that. And again, if you have any questions, this would be the time to submit those questions using the chat box at the bottom of your screen. I see we already have 2 questions, so we'll get into that soon. Okay. A few seconds and then we close the poll. Okay, we have 19 responses. All right, okay, great. So 79% are saying yes, this has been a concern or a rising concern. And I think based also on the data that we've seen presented here today, I think that is in line with that. There's growing intensity and sophistication in the kind of threats that we're seeing. So I'll invite our speakers to respond to some of the questions that we have. So the first question is from Lolu, I hope I've said it correctly. And the question is for Paolo. How do you estimate cyber insurance covers?
Excuse me, can you come again? How do you
estimate cyber insurance covers?
Right.
Yes.
Cyber insurance cover or cyber insurance costs?
Cover.
Cover, yeah. Like, well, it's the estimation is obviously not done by us, it's done by insurers and reinsurers globally. And it's similar to other insurance coverages, is made on a submission of specific documentation, proposal form, questionnaire of various kind. Many underwriters now base their risk selection on engagement with the IT department. Cyber insurance it's a different kind of insurance related to a more streamlined property or others, which is probably can be dealt by anyone. I have to say that all the largest insurers and reinsurers have got in-house engineers that can assess the cyber resilience of a prospective insured. And then after that, based on limits and retentions, based on the jurisdiction in which they operate, because as you can imagine, there are different level of exposure depending on the industry, they price the cost of insurance. Okay.
Okay, great, thanks. I hope that answers that for you, Lolu. And then the second question is from Samson, and he asks, do all ransomware attacks trigger breach notification obligations under data privacy law, for instance, where data is not unlawfully accessed by third parties, rather only access to data by the data controller stroke processor is denied or limited? Yeah, so do you have to make a notification that there's been a breach? I don't know, is Philip, maybe Philip or James would like to respond?
Well, I would just say from our end, I guess it depends exactly where the data breach happens and what regulation is in force. And I think some regulations are more onerous than others. If you look at the GDPR, which Dr. Avinash mentioned in his presentation, that is probably one of the most onerous regulations in the world. And I think, there's a huge reporting obligation placed on companies. But across the world, the level of reporting obligations does vary quite significantly. And I think everywhere, every country in every part of the world is on its kind of different journey. I think everyone recognizes that it's important to be transparent, especially when sensitive data has been compromised. and that could be corporate data, or it could be data about individuals, health records, etc. But the obligations vary depending on where the jurisdiction applies and where the data breach happened.
Okay, so just an awareness of what the obligations for each country demand. Okay, good.
Correct.
Then there's a question from Agnes. How would you describe the trends of cyber attacks in the travel agency booking system? And do you offer affirmative coverage for this industry?
Well, I'll jump in. We can't say we have a huge deal of clients who are specifically in the travel agency booking. But what we can say, because we have clients who are in the aviation industry, is that, and it's not necessarily a cyber, it's more of what we classify as a crime risk. We have seen quite a few sophisticated frauds in travel booking, with ticket prices and tickets being purchased fraudulently and then money being returned but not returned in the full amount. And so we have seen a trend across a number of with airlines and other companies that are operating in the travel industry where they've had issues with fraud with online booking. That's not the type of loss that would necessarily be covered under a cyber policy, but that's probably what we can say has been a trend that we've seen.
Okay, great. And I know we're running out of time, so we'll just take this question. Would you consider a security gap assessment a mandatory exercise for all organizations? And if so, what typically would this process entail in terms of road steps, resource allocation, costs, and general timelines?
I did this one.
Philip.
Yes, good. Thank you. Perhaps this is very critical for every organization to do a certain risk assessment for all the data and all the data types that they hold. And we have seen, and this also gives the organization the ability to approach the cyber security in a more precise way. So they bring precision. For example, how do you assess, how do you understand all the sensitive data that you hold in an organization? How do you identify where does this data sit? What are the applications that access this type of data? And even going into details, all the, for example, the containers of this data, like databases, how are they configured? And are they configured to align with the best practices, for example, that you have put across? And there are some certain standards and best practices and frameworks that guide the best configuration ways. And all these are set. And it's very, very critical for an organization to do that. Notwithstanding the other person in terms of the people controls, but then very, very important for an assessment about your environment, and both technical and also the readiness in terms of, do we have really policies that align with the regulations that we are proclaiming? And then are the people trained enough? So it's quite a broad aspect, but from a technology point of view, it's very important to assess three main things. One, the repositories and how they are configured, the sensitive data, where are they located, are they classified, are they secured properly, and of course, three, an alignment to various benchmarks, standards, and best practices that you have subscribed to as an organization.
Yes, thank you for that. And actually, you've touched on something that I was thinking in my mind as the session was progressing, because we've heard that people are the weakest link. So how do you ensure that your teams are able to quickly identify and recognize a threat and are able to take the proper action. So that, that training of teams, I think is something that is also quite critical. I know we've not discussed it and we're out of time, but I think this is a very topical issue, and we could, keep going, and perhaps in future we can also have more forums on this. But I'd like to thank all our speakers very much for taking the time to share their insights today. Thank you to our partners, Gras Savoye and Oracle as well. Ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of today's session. We thank you very much for being our audience today. Please do look out for the recording of this session, and feel free to share it with your friends and colleagues. I think there's a lot of learning that can be had that was had today in this session. So thank you very much, and do have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you, Radha. Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone.